What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Ham House Sports. It's Big Matt and Little Matt, and this is episode 3 on Ham House Sports Guide to Collecting and Investing.
In sports cars.
Yes, in sports cars.
Right, because we ain't giving any other investment advice.
No, sports cars all the way.
All the way. So here's the deal, guys. We're going to talk about the different eras of sports cards. And this matters. So the first video, we talked about why sports cards. The second video, what drives the value. Once you start to understand those two concepts, now you can actually look at the era the card was in. Now, Matthew, we've broken this down into 4 eras.
Yes.
Okay. Those eras are what I would call pre-war,
which is 1945
and prior.
Yeah.
Yep. Then we've got
vintage,
which is going to be
1975 and prior.
Late 40s, 50s, all the way up until like early 80s. Then we've got the junk wax era, which is going to be like mid 80s, right?
To 1990s.
Yep, 90s. And then you've got modern era, which is like post 2000.
Yes.
Right. Now, it's really important to understand what era a card comes from to help understand its value. Now, naturally, the older the card, the more expensive because what we talked about last time, it's probably more rare. The condition's probably not as good, whatever. But again, that's not just like a general principle. So there are different things within each era of sports cards that you need to be made aware of. Okay.
Yes.
Now, we are not big into pre-war. There's a lot of guys that are into early vintage. This is T206, the small tobacco cards, the Gaudi cards, the old square cards. They're really cool.
Super cool.
But they're just, it's almost
really
like its own world.
Yeah.
And they're also very expensive because they are truly like a piece of history.
Yes.
And so we're really not going to get into that because the likelihood of even finding those is pretty low.
Yeah.
But
unless they're already graded and stupid expensive.
Yeah, they're probably going to be graded already. So that's just a whole nother a whole nother video series. But when we start talking about vintage, Matthew, let's talk about vintage baseball and what people need to be looking for there.
So vintage baseball. Vintage baseball is from 1946 all the way up to about 1980. Now, vintage is, you'll hear a lot of people talking about it and how some cards can be really expensive. And we can talk about why those cards can get really expensive. One of the reasons is the cards have to be from Hall of Fame players. So if you find a player who's a good player, but he's not really recognizable or he wasn't in the Hall of Fame, right? It doesn't do as much. But a player like Willie Mays, Ernie Banks, Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, they do tons of money. Like you saw that Mickey Mantle card do $12.6 million, which those prices. So basically, the better the player, the higher the prices, right? And another thing is condition. So when you send a card to get graded, like we talked in the last video, it's either a 1 or a 10. 10 being the best, right? So the higher the card's graded, the more rare it is. So we have these cards right here.
I just want to show you guys a little bit here. So like this is an example of a vintage card. This is a 1961. This is a Charlie Lau 1961 Topps.
What do you think that card goes for?
Okay. This card may go for 10 to $12.
So it doesn't do a lot since the guy's not a star.
But the Mickey Mantle card of this specific set, raw, would probably do $150.
No, at least.
And then if it were graded, that card could be as high as a couple $100,000 if it was a 10. And even this card, if it was in a perfect 10, would still probably be a few $1,000 card.
Yeah, 5. If I had to guess.
So again, that's your early vintage set. So there's a lot of guys who collect sets from the 1950s. Another thing that's interesting about vintage is the set itself. So like the 1952 Topps being the first set is the most recognized set.
Two of the best players of all time, rookie cards. It had Jackie Robinson, Ted Williams.
So you've got the 50s and 60s were Topps and Bowman early 50s, and then it became mostly Topps through the 60s. Fleer kind of jumped in a little bit, but those cards weren't that valuable.
Fleer
there was like a Fleer baseball set from like 63.
No, 60. I thought it was 61 Fleer basketball. It's like Wilt Chamberlain.
It is, but I'm saying Fleer got in then, but they weren't as popular. So Topps pretty much dominated the market up until the mid 80s. And so then in the 80s, you've got cards starting to hit the market like this. So this is a Dennis Eckersley, and that's like an early 80s Topps card there. And then here's another one. This is Donruss, and that's George Brett, Hall of Famer. But by the time you get into the 70s and 80s, you're starting to get towards the end of vintage.
Yes.
Those cards are not going to have as much value unless they're highly graded. And then when you move into
the
junk wax era, this is a Bo Jackson Topps rookie. Okay.
Bo Jackson's a great player.
Topps traded. Now, he's not a Hall of Famer, but because of his injury and because he was so iconic as an athlete, Bo Jackson's stuff still does well. But again, that card was way overproduced.
Yeah. How many do you think they produced of that card?
Hundreds of thousands, I would guess. So there's so many of them that were made, they're just not worth as much. So when people come to us and they go, "Oh man, I got these cards in my closet."
Yeah.
Well, when were they from? I don't know. They're probably from the 80s when I was a kid. Well, they're probably not going to be worth anything.
No.
There may be, let's see, 10 cards from like 1980 to like 1990s.
That are worth like
anything.
$20.
Yeah. You've got like a Cal Ripken Jr. rookie. You've got like a Ricky Henderson, Ozzie Smith rookie. You know, you maybe got a King Griffey Jr.
Or Mark McGuire, maybe.
No, not even McGuire because
Barry
the steroid stuff.
Bonds.
Not even really Barry Bonds. I mean, you've got these guys that are just a handful that are worth something. But here's the reality, that any of these cards have been in pristine condition for 30, 40, 50, 60 years is really low. That's why the value's there. So people who think, "Oh man, you know, my family member passed away and we found all these cards," or "I picked this stuff up at a flea market," they've probably been passed around so much. The likelihood of finding that needle in a haystack is really, really low. So just understand that. But there's still people who collect those cards.
Yes.
You can still have fun with them. I remember growing up as a kid watching Cal Ripken Jr. I saw him break the streak for most consecutive games played. So that matters to me. It's meaningful to me. So I like to collect his cards.
He still has his Cal Ripken collection back here with the signed ball and all of his rookies.
And I paid money for those, right? And so there are people who will pay money for cards of players that they like. So that's the junk era. So, you know, if you've got some vintage, it could have value if it's in really good grade and if it's the Hall of Fame players, rookie cards, etc. If you're in the junk era, probably not. There's a couple of needle in a haystack era cards, but they're really, really rare. And then you've got the modern era. So talk a little bit about the modern era and what people need to be looking for.
So in the modern era, which is 2000 and prior, so basically Tom Brady's rookie right to right now, which is like Desmond Ridder rookies in football. But in the modern cards, you want to be looking for low serial numbered cards, autographs, and patches, which are pieces of the player's jersey. And those really drive the market.
So the card companies started to recognize that if the athlete's autograph was on a card, it started to drive the value of the card. Because back in the day, there were no autograph cards
I don't
for
think
players.
there was an autograph card on card until 1996.
Yeah, so once the autographs started to come into play, companies started to limit the number of autographs, low number, high demand, value goes up. But now guys sign cards all the time. So getting an autograph of a professional athlete was always kind of one of the things, right?
Yeah.
But now you can pretty much go get an athlete. So just having a signature is cool, but it doesn't necessarily mean the value is going to go up, right? So you have to have the autograph. You've got to have the condition. You've got to have a low serial number, right? A piece of their jersey helps. And then you start to get into, you can show that.
Yeah.
So this is Justin Fields, quarterback for the Chicago Bears. That's a piece of a jersey with his autograph, and this is a numbered to 25 card. This card has some significant value to it. And the thought process for investors or collectors to go, hey, could Justin Fields win a Super Bowl? Could Justin Fields become,
that's what we talked about in the last video about performance. So basically, if he won a Super Bowl this year, that card would probably close to double in value.
So you got people who will buy these cards expecting the performance of a player to go up, and therefore you get the increase of value in a card. But when you flood the market with millions of people that are doing the sports cards collecting and investing, now you have a high demand, a lot of people in, and a low supply of cards, and then you start to see the values increase. Yeah. So as a collector yourself or as an investor, you can start to understand those market trends. You can understand the eras of cards, and then you can begin to capitalize on it. Now, one of the things we like to do is use modern sports cards, like we've got here, a Ronald Acuna rookie, a Joe Burrow rookie, and a Shohei rookie. Use these modern cards to make money, by buying, selling, grading, trading, whatever, and getting into older vintage cards
and like PC, like players that we like.
Yeah, players that you collect. So again, hopefully you understand the different eras of cards, and as you start to tie all of this in together, you start to understand you have a market economy within sports card collecting that's going to drive the value of those cards up. So anything else on the eras?
I think that's it on eras.
Okay, cool.